recordings. The chairman, I will advise that the attendee should not disclose any personal information of individuals, as this would infringe the data protection rights of that individual. And can everyone please mute their microphones when not speaking? Okay, so first things first, apologies for absence. I don't believe we've got any. We've got a full house tonight, which is wonderful. Any declarations of interest at all? Anyone this evening? No. Okay. Public open session. Have we got anyone, Helen, online? No. Okay. I'll be surprised if we did, but I just wanted to check. So thank you. Okay, and then on to the minutes and recommendations of the meeting of the 2nd of August. So I'll start with sort of accuracy on page 5.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, yeah.
Who is Councillor H. Ramsey with an E? Is it? I thought we had a Councillor Ramsey with an A, but I didn't realise we've got another one with an E, which is correct, please.
Okay, I think it's AY, so I think we can get that changed in any future papers. Okay, so we've had page 5, and then page 6. No, okay. There weren't any matters arising, and obviously the other issues were done in exempt session. So I'm not sure there's anything else we can add at this stage. So no, okay. So we're going to move on to items for consideration. I think if Helen or Peter can, if Helen or Peter can then just give us a little introduction to each of the papers, that would be great. If we can do them in the order, I think, as you put in the agenda, just to make it easier. Yeah, well, I think we ought to go through each paper sort of one by one, but if we can try and if colleagues can try and make points sort of quite substantive ones rather than maybe more, if there's a slight spelling mistake or something, we can go to that offline, but it needs to be a bit more of a substantive comment, I think, as we go through them, if we can do that. Okay, thank you.
So the following listed policies have been drafted. There's further ones to follow, but starting with the information and data protection policy, that's been drafted in order to meet requirements. Do you want me to do an introduction to each one before we discuss?
Actually, yes, we could very briefly talk about each one and then we'll discuss them in order, I think. Yeah, just a couple of sentences on each one would be great. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, our external HR consultant, Debbie Glynn, has been involved in the creation of these policies. So the DBS policy is just to clarify around certain members of staff who need a DBS check, and the policy around how often checks will be completed, and further information on that. Overtime and toil is around how much toil members of staff can collect over a certain length of time, and then when it can be taken, and around working additional hours if overtime or toil can be taken. Travel and subsistence is around members of staff and when they can take be subsidised for travel or other expenses related to their work. A remote working policy to be more flexible to members of staff in being able to work remotely. Unsociable hours, around unsociable hours that may need to be completed as a result of their work. An employee code of conduct, and a gossiping policy to just make it clear around, which is kind of in relation to employee code of conduct. A severe weather policy, this was prompted by the hot weather over the summer, to sort of set an internal high working temperature, like what's the maximum working temperature, and managing personal relationships at work. So that's just to clarify around relationships at work, whether that be family or romantic relationships, and how to navigate that in a work setting.
And I just wanted to add one point connected to remote working. The remote working policy is at the discretion of the service. So if there's particular demands on a person's time, if there's particular papers for committee, then that needs to be taken into consideration before the opportunities taken advantage of to remote work at home.
Is that everything, Helen? You've covered them all. Great. Okay, no problem. I mean, just before we start and I guess go through them, take comments on each one. I mean, my understanding, I think, having spoken to Peter and others over the past few months, I think a lot of these have come out partly because issues have arisen within the council, within either employees. So there's been a need to strengthen particular aspects of this, or it's essentially kind of a bit of a catch-up process in that we may not have had policies on these before, and we now need them in place because some of them around flexible working and remote working obviously have been much more apparent since the pandemic. So some of it is historic, and some of it is just a case of trying to modernise and improve our processes. So happy to take comments in the order I think that Helen read them out, and we can kind of go from there, really. Councillor Strong.
Chairman, may I ask a question over the whole set of policies that have been done? Because having read all of the pages, a considerable amount of work has obviously gone into this, and I'm hoping just to comment on the policy rather than the wording. And I'd suggest that possibly if we could make comments on individual wording over a period over the next week, so that before it goes to council, that if we've got queries on wording or grammar or whatever, they can be dealt with that way. But in view of the amount of work that's been done on producing this, where did these policies come from? Is there a standard industry template, so to speak, for these, or who did the drafting of that, and how specific is it to this council?
I think Helen did mention that at the beginning, but I'll pass that over to the town clerk, and Helen can give a bit more detail on that. I think they did explain, but I'll let them explain now.
So I think there's 2 points that we need to pick up connected to what Councillor Strawn's raised. Number one is that there is a now best practice template which exists, which sets out the aspirations that every town council should have connected to its policy and governance structure. That's the first thing to say. So you have a point of reference about what you should create as a town council. Secondary from that, and Helen will talk some more about it, we have an emerging personnel offer here, but we also have obviously 2 externals who give us guidance connected to the detail associated with that, who are CIPD qualified. And a significant proportion of the policies that you have in front of you are first drafted by an external who has knowledge of the sector and of course has the expertise associated with personnel practice. Helen.
I just come back on
Councillor Strawn. Yeah.
So I might just come back on that. There's templates that have basically been provided to us, and are there any, perhaps if there's been changes to the standard template that relate specifically to this council, we might be advised of them. But if it's the standard template that there is of the industry, I think it's there's less reason to be actually looking into it. It's just whether the policy is what we want in quite the terms that we want that I think is the key, rather than going into individual wording of drafting and, as I say, grammar and punctuation.
No, I think Councillor Strawn, that's fine. I mean, I did say at the beginning it'd be great if people can keep points to sort of substantive ones, and I think if there are particular drafting points, then maybe we can come back to them and email the town clerk after the meeting. But I would like to try and stick to substantive points as best we can. But let's see what colleagues say. Councillor Pullinger.
Thank you. I've just got one general comment before we go into the specific policies, and that's around the review cycle. So it seems to me that an annual review cycle is probably too frequent for this sort of policy. There's no reason why, if there is a specific change in legislation or whatever, we can't review something out of a cycle. But where we're not expecting significant changes to our policy over time, then I think probably a 3-year cycle is more realistic. And that, because all that would happen with an annual review cycle is it's more work for our officers to do that review, and indeed for us as a committee and then council to do a review as well. So I would, unless there's a good reason for a specific policy to have a shorter period, I would recommend a 3-year review cycle rather than a 1 year.
Okay, Town Clerk, have you got any comments on that?
I think that's a sensible solution.
Yeah, I can make that as a formal proposal.
Okay, I think
Councillor
Russell seconded it. Okay, in that case, then all those in favour of having a 3-year review cycle of the personnel policies. Okay, it's pretty unanimous, I think. Yep. Okay, there you go. Thank you very much. Right, sorry.
Thank you. Thanks for all the hard work that have gone into these. So as has been mentioned, there is a lot of detail here. I have some comments on the information and data protection policy. We're looking at that one first, I guess, towards the end of page 11, but I'm happy to send those by email. Basically, I just don't think that reflects current best practice, but I have some suggestions for how we can make that better.
Good. Councillor North, did you had a question? Yeah.
Well, it's not really a question, it's just an observation. I wonder if the last 3 of these are really necessary at all and couldn't be covered by just a paragraph in a single paragraph each in the Employee Code of Conduct. I just wonder if it's not getting into far too much detail. And I must admit, it does seem to me a little bit questionable whether we have a right to tell people they shouldn't gossip. And isn't that normal behaviour, natural interaction?
I'll pass over to the Town Clerk if he wants to expand on that.
My own preference would be, I know it kind of feels like we're over-engineering. I think my own preference is if we can pick the right words for those policies, I would rather have policies as points of reference. And I suppose in part, what we're trying to do here is to manage the more extreme element of the continuum. Yep. So I think reasonable needs to come into this conversation, and in reasonable terms, most of the things that are described here, we need to try and capture that. We're also trying to manage what you might deem to be the kind of unreasonable aspects of some behaviour, which hopefully we wouldn't have in this council.
Councillor Russell.
It worries me because particularly with the gossiping policy, there's a definition of gossiping, but that's open to so much interpretation. We could be tying ourselves in complete knots. I mean, I know there are problems occasionally, and I know we've had 1 or 2 issues fairly recently, but it's this definition and who's going to say. So I tell you something and somebody says, I told you that in confidence. Perhaps they hadn't told me that it was in confidence. You're just opening cans of worms.
Yep.
Oh, I thought we were going to discuss each policy
I was just
one
about
by
to get
one.
to that point.
So
Councillor
if we
Strong.
could,
Yeah. No, I think I'm assuming I'm trusting that Councillor Russell was referring to the point that Councillor North made about the all-encompassing point. So I will leave it there. But yeah, if we could start on if people have comments on the gossiping policy as proposed, can we save it until we get to that point, and then we can have a further discussion at that stage? Otherwise, I will certainly lose track of where we are. So if we can start with the information and data protection policy, and any comments specifically on that, please, if any. Good.
And move we note it and pass any observations on the individual points to the clerk by, say, a week today, so it gives the clerk time then to review and update for the council meeting after next.
Yes, I think that's right. I think next Tuesday is obviously going to be too soon, but the next council meeting to have sort of collated comments by then, I think, and then you can take that forward. Obviously, if there are no comments, I will assume colleagues are satisfied with the policy as is, other than as Councillor Knight said, we'll email particular specific comments, but in the broad substantive points, I'll take it as read. Okay, so we've got data protection, disclosures and barring policy. Next one. Okay, noted. Good. Thank you. Overtime and time off in lieu policy. Toil. I think Councillor Ramsey was first. There were three all went up at the same time. So.
I think it's very clearly explained. I can't see that any of it is controversial. Can I just move that we accept it, please?
Okay, I'll take the two other comments and then we'll move on. Councillor Foster, Frank Foster.
Yes, I have this thing about acronyms. I like them to be spelled out at least once at the beginning. So I would like to see toil, brackets, time off in lieu, close brackets, then that's it. If that indeed is what it means, it may mean something entirely different.
It's in the title of the policy, Councillor Foster.
Sorry?
It's in the title of the document, Councillor Foster.
Is it really? Oh, well, there you go.
Sorry, Councillor Pullen, do you have a question or go on?
So I have two more controversial points, I suppose. So I guess my first question is, should all employees of the council be entitled to claim overtime or toil? I would suggest not necessarily for senior appointments. And secondly, I'm not sure about the use of double time payments. I don't know how that relates to current practice, but that seems quite generous for a Sunday, for example. So I wonder whether that needs further discussion.
Take Councillor Pullinger's point and then maybe the town clerk can respond.
Yeah, so similar, so not just the double time point, but really understanding of what is the current practice in terms of overtime beyond 37 hours, because I can appreciate if you get significantly above your 37 hours that you would have a premium. But if, say, you're working 1 or 2 extra hours, would that necessarily attract a premium? And also, actually, in fact, it appears from this wording that toil attracts the same premium as overtime would attract. And certainly in my experience, toil has been a one-to-one basis, not at a premium from roles I've had previously.
Okay, I'll ask Peter to respond in a minute, but I mean, I think probably, I mean, speaking from the chair, but I think, I mean, there may well be a case, I think, for some of our employees, particularly those working outside or helping with events and stuff, there may be a case for that, but I mean, I'll let the town clerk respond.
So I think with overtime and toil, then I think it would be helpful to have a period of time for members to reflect on what they think is the right practice. My own personal preference is that toil shouldn't be a multiplier. It should be what it is. I think there are some historical practices that we need to get on top of, which relate to how much is it reasonable to have a maximum level of toil and when we should give the opportunity to take it. There is NJC advice connected to what multipliers are appropriate for what periods of time. So if you have an employee who might work for Public Realm who does works overtime on a Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon or whatever, there are suggested Green Book multipliers that you might want to use associated with that. Yep. But we can have that more detailed conversation with members and get their guidance connected to what they deem to be appropriate.
Councillor Russell.
I think we need to be very clear about the difference between when overtime is applicable and when time off in lieu is applicable. So yes, if somebody works on a Sunday, they may be entitled to overtime at a specific rate that's higher than the normal rate. But surely if it's toil, it's toil. And as has already been said, it's like for like. So, you know, we need to be clear what we're saying to staff about when they're entitled to claim overtime and when they will be expected to take time off in lieu. But the point for me is that certainly senior staff should not take time off in lieu. It's more usual for staff like Public Realm to take overtime and other staff to take time off in lieu. So I think we need to make this very clear, and the policy at the moment is not clear at all on all of that.
Okay, Councillor Strawn and then Councillor Pullinger.
Yes, our staff, I believe, are employed under the NJC conditions. Is there a conflict between this policy and the NJC conditions that might create issues over which will actually apply? Because I think we need to be very careful on that we make sure that we're consistent and know where we have, regardless of any other comments.
Councillor Pullinger, and then I'll ask Town Clerk to.
So yeah, so I mean, I think it's been in terms of how we deal with it has been covered. I think we need a review in terms of the rates and everything at different times and what have you. But in terms specifically around the Orchard Centre staff, with the normal operating hours of the Orchard Centre, including some hours which are considered unsociable, if someone is employed as their core role to work at the Orchard Centre, which involves working beyond 10 p.m, that shouldn't attract a premium in my view.
Town Clerk.
I agree with Councillor Pullinger's perception. This council, as we know, is signed up to the NJC conditions of service in all that it does. And whichever determination we make connected to overtime and toil should follow the NJC national conditions of service. There is no option to extract ourselves from the NJC unless we have a localized pay award.
So in which case, why isn't what's in the NJC clearly stated here so that we can see what we have to accept and what may be able to be changed?
Yeah,
I think that's a sensible observation.
Yeah, that was going to be my point actually, Councillor Russell, is that it would be nice to have almost like side by side what the NJC kind of rules are versus what we're saying here, and then we can see where at variance or whether we're better or worse. I don't know. It's hard to compare without seeing the two together. So I think that might be one way of going forward. But I'll take a couple more comments on this because I think it's a really important point, and then maybe we can have a proposal or a decision on what we're going to do next. So I think Councillor North and then back to Councillor Strawn, I think.
It's stated here that and without first seeking the advance agreement of the line manager in writing, I would suggest that they need an extra sentence in there that refers to the approval of overtime by the town clerk, who doesn't have a direct line manager as such. And I believe there has been in the past a council resolution in respect of that, which I can't remember exactly what it said now, but that should be included in this document, I would suggest.
Good point, Councillor North, thank you. Councillor Foster, have you got a hand up? Sorry, I wasn't sure if you got your pen.
In relation to termination of employment, untaken toil will be lost upon termination, no payment of notice. What doesn't specify the criteria. In terms of terminations, that a gross misconduct situation, on the basis that an employee has accrued toil, so that they have worked additional hours to accrue that toil, and we are saying that upon termination, we're not going to allow them to take any payment in lieu, and the toil will be lost. Could you explain how that works, please?
Or Helen.
Yeah. So that's on leaving the council. If they've got any excess toil, it's not paid. It's as in any excess holiday not taken would be paid. It would just be lost. But it could be taken when they're working their notice period, but not. But yeah.
So for clarification, so if they've accrued 2 months worth of toil, say, and they leave with a month, the 1 month of toil that they've accrued will be paid. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, people are not going to accrue 2 months.
Yeah. If they've got say 2 days toil, they can take the toil when they're working their notice period. However, if it's not taken, it's not paid.
Councillor Strawn, did you have another question?
Well, actually, I was going to put a proposal in view of the comments that have been made and the uncertainty that there is and the need for various comparisons. I might move that we defer this matter to the next personnel committee when we can have a report with all the information that's been requested. I don't see that there's any point in taking it any further tonight, and certainly it can't go to council for approval in its current form.
Okay, have we got a seconder for that?
Seconded.
Okay, it's a couple of seconders. Okay, so in relation to the overtime and time of leave policy, we defer until next personnel committee and we get, I think, a comparison. We talked about more further clarity, all the points I think that have been captured tonight. So all those in favour of moving it to the next personnel committee meeting? Not unanimous again. Thank you for that, everybody. Okay, we'll move on. Travel and subsistence policy. Sorry, Councillor Pullinger, was it a question regarding the, oh, it's taste. All right, okay. Travel and subsistence policy. Councillor Pullinger.
Okay, thank you. Just two comments on this one really. The first is in relation to the mileage rate, and just wondering whether it might be cleaner to just refer to the HMRC rate so that if and when that changes, we don't actually have to update our policy. It's implied that it would change, but for the sake of not having to change it, we could just refer to the rate. The second one was around the subsistence policy, and the first sentence or first paragraph of that around subsistence allowance applies to staff attending evening meetings that end after 7 p.m. So do we pay for staff who are at a meeting like this evening, for example? Because the way it's written would imply that that would be they'd be eligible for it if they're at a meeting, a normal town council meeting, which if that's not the intent, then it just needs a adjustment to make that clear.
Okay. Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, this is suggested policy going forward as the current policy, as opposed to current policy. We're not allowing any claims connected to subsistence for committee attendance, but it suggested it might be an idea that you want to consider.
Councillor Mark Foster.
Could I just clarify in relation to evening meals? So we've got a hotel accommodation. It references bed and breakfast. I might be missing it, so I might have one of those days. But does it reference evening meals within the policy, or is that related to some other item elsewhere? What is that dealt with within the expenses policy? In which case, is there a limit for what can be spent on an evening meal?
I believe the limit is £10 for an evening meal, but I'll have to find the exact page.
Can I just
go on?
It doesn't appear to be referenced in here. It makes a reference to special evening meeting allowances. I'm not being funny. £10 for an evening meal. Where you go, McDonald's? I'm not being funny. You're not going to get much for £10 an evening meal. So I think that's something that we need to review. If it is only £10 on overnight policy for an evening meal, we need to review it. Or we say that it's included within a bed breakfast evening meal or something of that nature.
Yeah, I think some clarity is needed around both the. I had a point from the chair actually around the hotel accommodation point, which can be wrapped up in this. I think the £75 a night is extremely low, especially if you were looking at a conference based in London. I appreciate the last sentence gives some. On that paragraph gives some leeway, but even then I think it maybe needs to be a little bit higher just to take that into consideration. But I think Councillor Foster's point is very valid in that, yes, we have a point about the subsistence here related to meetings or presumably in this building or on council premises or whatever. But if you're away from home or a conference or whatever, how does that work then? And I think there is a big gap there. We need some further clarity. So I'm just going to let the town clerk respond and then I'll come back to Councillor Pullinger. Okay.
The only observation I was going to make is every council should have a travel and subsistence policy. Because of the type of council that we are, it's extremely rare that people go and spend an overnight accommodation connected to any form of training. I've not known it since I've been here in the last 2.25 years. It's very, very rare. Hardly anybody in our establishment travels. There may be one person in particular who I can think of who does some travel for us connected to the nature of what they do. It's extremely rare, but we should have a proper point of reference. But in this particular council, the volume of activity is minuscule.
No, I agreed. I appreciate it is rare, but I think we do need a policy in place and it needs to be as clear as possible. So, Councillor Pullinger.
Yes, I mean, I would say, as the clerk has just made the point, that it is quite rare that this would happen. I think that it might be that we consider a different figure for the maximum for the bed and breakfast, but also I certainly think where it comes to subsistence, that should be more, rather than referring to evening meetings, should be more clearer around it actually referring to overnight stays. And as Councillor Foster said, I think £10 would be insufficient for that, and it should be a higher number as well.
Okay, are we happy to go ahead and incorporate those comments, or what do colleagues think? Do we want to defer it to the next personnel meeting along with the other one, or? Okay, I'm trying to not put too many things in the chair, but I'm not getting any. Councillor Russell.
I think we do need to defer them because this is important. If we're going to have these policies, they've got to be right. And we sometimes don't have personnel meetings that are in the diary. If we need an extra personnel meeting just for this, then we need to do it. But certainly we need to see how this can be improved and have another draft in front of us.
Okay, is that proposal?
Yes.
Okay, seconder, Councillor Ramsey. Okay, so okay, the proposal is to take the travel and subsistence policy to the next personnel meeting. If we have to have one earlier than the normally scheduled one, then I guess we can fit one around, and it may be an existing council meeting or something. But let's have a look at the calendar. So all those in favour of moving this to a future personnel meeting? Okay. Thank you with the drafting. Great, that's unanimous again. Thank you. Okay, remote working policy. Councillor College.
I think this is quite a good policy actually, and quite comprehensive. Very minor thing, and then I would propose we note this one, which is the final section on remote working abroad. I think it's not necessarily abroad, it's away from home, and I think the text is fine. It's just the title should be away from home rather than abroad.
Okay, I just had one question from the chair, and it's more a point of clarity. It's just how the remote working policy kind of interrelates with the flexible working request that I know staff can put in, and whether that is covered under this or will be covered elsewhere. And just to make sure we've kind of got it all lined up really.
There'll probably be a separate one, but they'll complement each other. So the flexible working around, taking sort of odd hours rather than working a full day for different appointments. Remote working will be more around, just allowing staff to work away from the office.
Thank you. Councillor Knight.
So it's a fairly minor point in relation to the sort of main categories of remote working at the top. So of course, one of the most common reasons for remote working at the moment is because you've tested positive for COVID and you feel perfectly well, but you don't want to give it to your colleagues. And I think it's actually worth encouraging people that if you're unwell, would rather you work from home if you can than give it to your colleagues. And that feels like that could be made explicit.
Okay, Councillor Russell.
I'm a little bit concerned about how far this policy is going. If people ask to work remotely for whatever reason, because a child's ill or whatever, but I am more concerned if they ask for remote working on a regular basis ad infinitum. And I think that with the small team that we've got, both in public realm and admin, that would create problems. And I'm not quite sure how that's addressed through the policy. I'm probably missing something, but I want to work at home on Tuesdays and Thursdays forevermore is not something I'd be very happy with.
I'll take a couple more comments. I'll let the town clerk respond. Councillor Mark Foster.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong on this one. So the remote working policy makes reference to someone having to have completed the probationary period attached to their job role. What happens if they're taken on primarily as a remote working? Because it's not dealt with in that, because they can't complete the probationary period if they're taken on as a remote worker. So it's a moot point, because I guess we're not going to be, but it doesn't, I don't believe it's addressed. If we're going to be pedantic about policy, it's not in the policy to say you have to work your probationary period. In terms of, so that's the first question. In terms of the the eligibility. I think there's a number of questions around the eligibility. So what we're saying is if something is any aspect of someone's recent appraisal is unsatisfactory, they can't remote work. The disciplinary record needs to be clean. There's an aspect around the home environment being suitable. Again, what's the selection criteria? What do we put in place to say they can or can't? What's the measurement, or is it someone's judgment? And I realise I'm being pedantic here, but if we've got a policy, how are we going to measure it so that we can say it's fine or it isn't? And then where an employee's role does not involve supervisory duties that require undertaking in person. So are we saying then that someone that does require to be supervisory, working alongside someone can't remote work, seems to be what it says. So in terms of managers, they're not being able to work remotely. Is that what we're saying? Again, I'm overly complicating this, perhaps. I'm just concerned about the wording of the eligibility so that we don't again tie ourselves in knots.
Thank you. I'll let the town clerk come in because I think there's quite a lot there. I mean, I think the broader point is in terms of remote working policy, it is something that both large and small organisations seem to manage, and it's very much a kind of a cultural thing, isn't it? But I'll let the town clerk.
Okay, so ever conscious that we're a small organisation, and it's difficult to manage sometimes when you don't have a proper deployment of staff and you have calls upon their time. I think at the moment this policy feels a little bit overcomplicated, and that I'm very much used to working in local government, and the predominant point of reference for somebody working at home or remote working would be it's at the discretion of the service. Their line manager and or the clerk would be cognizant of the demands of that post at the given time. Yeah, and that is the type of conversation you'd be having with the individual. You probably wouldn't be having other offshoots of that connected to their disciplinary past or whatever else. It's a predominant point. Can they work at home conscious of the demands of what they do? Yeah, and that's the predominant conversation you'd be having. So I think perhaps elements of this are over-engineered to that degree. They're just making something complicated when it doesn't need to be. But we are a small council, and we need to be very, very thoughtful that, for instance, if we were to say yes to working at home for a third of our establishment on a regular basis, that might impact on productivity and other issues. At the same time, we want to try and be a modern employer, and we want to attract the right people to our organisation. So it's a gentle balance.
Thank you, Town Clerk. That's very comprehensive. Councillor Strong.
Yes, I'm unhappy with some of the wording in the policy statement in particular. Remote working is understood to mean working from home on an occasional, temporary or a permanent basis. I think we should be taking permanent out of this totally, because I think that is not a good sign. I see CBC employing a gypsy officer who's going to work remotely all the time, which is totally and utterly ridiculous in my view. So we can't have the permanent basis, which would also, I'd take out the paragraph relating to regular remote working, because I don't think we should be having regular remote working. There may be occasions where it's needed, and there are good reasons such as COVID or things like that. But to have the implication that we're going to be taking on staff in a small council where the being part of the community is an essential part, to have remote working on that permanent basis or regular basis is, to my mind, unacceptable. Yes, there are times when it is appropriate, but to have that in as the basic policy, I think, is wrong. And it may be that, in view of the town clerk's comments again, I'm afraid this may be one where we should defer it to another personnel meeting, so that these anomalies can be worked out of the system, rather than going on for a lengthy debate over the exact wording tonight.
No, sure. Point taken, Councillor Strawn. I'll let the town clerk come back, and then if we can, I'll take a couple of last comments, and then we'll try and move this on. If we can.
I mean, I'll keep this short. I think I sympathise and agree with some of the observations from Councillor Strawn. I think at the same time, we've got a difficult quandary, which Helen and I have a lot, which is ways of working are changing. The culture is changing. We want to attract the right people to our organisation. And I think particularly post-COVID, people's ways of working are changing. However, having said all of that, being pragmatic, we're still a small council with a small group of people, and we need to get the work done. So.
Okay, Councillor Foster.
I'd just like to agree with Councillor Strawn.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pullinger.
Yeah, so just to comment on my understanding of the meaning of permanent in that policy statement doesn't necessarily mean permanently 5 days a week. It could mean that they're taken on the basis that they permanently work from home 1 day a week, for example, which, as the clerk says, in modern day working life is more and more common. And I don't think we should automatically discount that as necessarily being an option if it means we get the right members of staff in when we're recruiting. But I'm happy to second the proposal that we defer this one.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got a proposal then to, I guess, come back to the next personnel committee as appropriate with some further options around remote working. I think taking into consideration comments from colleagues about both modern working practices, but also the fact that we are a small council and have a lot of work to do as well, and trying to find something that will, I guess, balance balance those two priorities. So all those in favour of moving this paper or this policy paper to the next meeting, then please. Thank you. That's unanimous again. Okay, thank you. Okay, unsociable hours policy. Councillor Pullinger.
I'll make this one quite short. I propose we defer this one and consider it in conjunction with the overtime and toil policy, and potentially to even combine it into the same policy.
Okay. Yep. Okay. All those in favour of what Councillor Pullinger just said about blending the two papers together? Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. Right, so employee code of conduct. Noted. Okay, great. Oh, sorry, Councillor Knight, quickly.
I have a small number of comments that I'd like to make offline, but happy to note it. If I can send those offline, that'd be great.
I think town clerk's agreed to that, so we can move on. We can take this one as read. Thank you. Sorry,
Councillor Knight has said twice now that he's got comments, and we've noted both policies. What's going to happen to those policies? Because are they going to council shortly with the alternatives, or are they going to go to another personnel meeting in the way of the other policies? Because we have no idea what Councillor Knight is going to say. And so, you know, where are we with deferring them or not? I think actually you need to make the comments, Councillor Knight, and that we need to bring them back to another personnel meeting, I'm afraid.
Okay, I mean, I'm happy with that. What I didn't want to do, and there is a danger of now doing this, is going through everything in great minutiae, but I was trying to hopefully, you know, sort of streamline the process. But if colleagues want to know what Councillor Knight's comments are, then I'm happy for people to share.
Was Madeline suggesting, sorry, Councillor Russell suggesting that I send them to the clerk and then the paper comes back to personnel, or that I go through the NIF?
I think she wanted to go through.
I think that's what I was suggesting, that if you've got detailed comments on those two policies, which is a valid thing to do, but we still then as a committee need to see the policies before they're recommended for approval to council.
Okay, can I make a suggestion then from the chair that the papers that will have additional comments that aren't being rewritten, if I can make that distinction, are then all published at the same time as the other ones in the personnel committee. So the ones we've noted, but I think it was primarily Councillor Knight had comments on, can then all just sort of be published together in that pack. But it may then be made clear the ones that we've asked to be essentially rewritten, which we've voted on, as opposed to ones that we've just noted with a few tweaks. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay, right. Councillor Knight.
Just to give you a flavour, they're all IT related. So at the end of page 37, employees may access their personal email during break times. I think that's a security risk, allowing access to personal email on corporate devices. So I would propose that isn't the case. Top of page 38, it says you shouldn't use the internet during work time unless it's an urgent matter. I would imagine a number of staff actually use the internet as a course of their work, and therefore that needs some subtle rewording. I have a bit of a debate, which may actually be worth discussing here. Page 39, the town council conducts drug and alcohol testing every 6 months. I'm not sure if that's, sorry, the town council conducts a drugs and alcohol test once every 6 months. So is that every 6 months for every member of staff? And that feels quite a lot to me. I don't know if that's normal, but that seems quite regular. You know, I'm not a young man and I've never had an alcohol or drugs test in my life. Every 6 months seems quite frequently.
Okay, maybe if Helen or the town clerk can comment specifically, I think, on the drug testing or substance testing point. And then I think the other ones, I guess, are more quite specifically to do with IT. I don't really want to get into a discussion about use of internet or whatever else necessarily, but yeah, if you want to comment on the substance policy first, and then we can go from there.
This subject is going to be further debated under exempt, and I'd like to defer until that point in time.
Thank you. Councillor Ramsey.
I've just picked up what Peter has said, but actually to put Councillor Foster, Mark's mind at rest. When it was first discussed about having this drugs and alcohol, it was discussed as random policy, random checks. It wasn't discussed that every member of staff would have to be lined up and have a test. It was just random testing that would take place.
Okay. Yeah, Councillor Pullins, this is related to the.
It's just a very, policy. It is related to it, but it's just a very brief, and I think we shouldn't stipulate a time. We should just say the council reserves the right to perform drug and alcohol tests and leave it at that from a policy perspective.
I think
how we do it would be.
Yeah, I think that's quite a wise suggestion, and it gives the council more leeway, I guess. Any further comments on that? Can we take it in exempt, please? Because it is obviously quite a sensitive issue. So if we can save it till then, that would be appreciated. So otherwise, can we take the employee code of conduct as read? I think we're obviously going to comment on some of the other aspects, but I don't think there are any other parts from slightly lost track a little bit now because there's quite a few components to it. But is there anything else you want to say, Town Clerk, on that? No. Okay, so we'll go into the detail of the alcohol and drugs stuff later. I'll take the rest of it as read, if that's okay. Okay. Right. Next policy, the gossiping policy then, Councillor Pullinger.
Yeah, so I think my view is that we're at risk of going into far too much detail on far too many things by having a gossiping policy. I think it should be covered by existing code of conduct policy that we've just looked at, and it really thinking about what's the output or what's the outcome of someone gossiping should be the key factor. So if that results in someone effectively being harassed or bullied, then we have existing policies that cover that. I think we're looking at getting far too tied up in knots, I think, if we were to have this policy. So I would actually propose that we don't adopt any specific gossiping policy.
Town Clerk, do you want to comment on this? Because I know I think there was a specific reason. Okay. 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 I'd like to hear that. Okay. I'd like to hear from the Town Clerk first, and then we can have a vote on it, please.
Yeah, I'm not going to add further to this debate, so I'll let the vote go.
Okay, thank you. All right. So all those in favour of not. Sorry, yes, Councillor North. Yeah.
I would question where this has come from, actually, and question what you might call the integrity of whoever proposed this in the first place, because it really is an unnecessary and unwarranted restriction on people's freedom of speech. So whoever, I know you've taken this from outside sources, but I would question the competence of whoever proposed this to the council in the first place. Especially when, I mean, this gossiping examples, you know, it relates to this rather balmy idea about preferred pronouns. I mean, where on earth does that come from? Negatively talking about a person's smell. So somebody comes in stinking of petrol, let's say for sake of a different argument, you can't say, you smelling of petrol, you better get out and go and have a shower. You can't, that's going to be against the rules to say that, is it? It's ludicrous, the whole thing. And I think I would ask Peter to question whoever proposed this in the first place.
Town clerk, have you got anything else to add on that?
No feedback, councillor North's comments.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I think we had a proposal, didn't we, about striking out the gossiping policy. And I think Councillor Pullinger's earlier point about wrapping up some of these other points, which we can get to in terms of code of conduct, if that's appropriate as well. Okay, so all those in favour of removing a gossiping policy from the policy sort of selection here. Okay, all those in favour, yeah, okay, that's unanimous, I think. Okay, so we got rid of that one. Okay, thank you. Severe weather policy. One to the other.
It says here there is no specific definition of severe weather.
Well, I mean, as I understand it, it's because I think in this country, I mean, it's around health and safety, isn't there? Isn't actually a sort of maximum temperature, I believe. In fact, it's Factories Act and various other stuff. So I think there is the legislation itself is a bit hazy, is my understanding. So whether we want to get in the business of clarifying that is probably for colleagues to judge. But I'll take Councillor Pullinger's point to start with.
Okay, so generally, most of it seems quite reasonable. I think where I get questioning is when it comes to temperature and maximum temperatures. And I think actually all of what's covered essentially in the final two paragraphs is essentially covered by where there's an amber or red warning that we'll do a risk assessment and consider what is appropriate. I'd be hesitant to put a fixed limit of 34 degrees when, unlike the low temperature, there isn't sort of legislation and what have you to stipulate what level that should be, especially where it says, for example, people should be encouraged to work from home. If it's over that, then their house might well be warmer than being in the office. So that doesn't actually help. So I think with effectively striking the final two paragraphs and just referring to doing a risk assessment where there's a weather warning in place, I think otherwise I'm reasonably happy with it.
Councillor Russell.
I think it's right to do an assessment when the Met Office issues a warning, but noting that the Met Office is issuing warnings right, left and centre all of the time. They're usually way over the top and they don't happen in the way that they're predicting. I won't go into detail about some of the idiocies recently, but yes, do an assessment, but the first assessment needs to be how valid is what the Met Office is saying.
Okay, point noted. I mean, I think in terms of severe weather, I mean, we have seen this year, haven't we, the hottest day we've ever had on successive days. So I think there is a very valid point, speaking from the chair, around these issues. We may even see extremely cold, winter days as well in the time ahead. So I think I'm pleased that this is on the table. But I think the point that colleagues have made are very valid. I'm not sure we necessarily need to vote on it. I think the points were pretty obvious, but if you want to say anything.
Well, I was going to add, but there's other members who want to speak first, so I'll defer to them.
Okay, sure. Sorry, Councillor Foster.
I just wanted to make the point that could we not rely on the discretion of the town clerk as to define whether this applies?
We could. I'm assuming this policy has been put forward because the town clerk needs, I guess, some parameters to work by. But I'll let him answer that question.
I mean, the fundamental issue that we're trying to resolve here is that we have a significant number of people who work outside, and that we need to be conscious of their needs in a changing climate and a changing world. And we use common sense. So if the weather is particularly hot and they're outside cutting grass for 6 or 7 hours and they need to drink water regularly, and then we need to be thoughtful of their situation, it doesn't tend to happen quite so much as for those people who work at the town hall or the depot. So it's being sensible. And I think an individual assessment without getting too carried away in regard to detail and is the right thing to do.
Okay, no, that's good. I mean, we do have a number of staff who work outside, so I think we are particularly aware of that. Councillor Thomas, did you have your hand up, or is it a question and answer? Okay, all right. So, Councillor Strawn, sorry.
Well, I think health and safety comes into it in that respect, and we'll cover it. I'll make one comment separately. There's just a letter in there that doesn't make sense in reading a paragraph, but I don't think that's just a typo, which I'll cover separately to avoid having a debate over P's and Q's, which I said we shouldn't have.
Thank you, Councillor Strawn. So I'll take this policy as noted, essentially, with the issue around the last paragraph being taken out, and the risk assessment being made as and when, because then that covers hot and cold policy. I think. Okay, good. Right. Okay, the final one: managing personal relationships at work. Councillor North.
Well, again, I just wonder if this isn't all taking it all a bit too far. I know some companies do have such policies, but there is a paragraph, I believe, in the staff code of conduct that more or less covers everything that's written here. So I wonder if that's not sufficient, and that we don't need to get into more detail about it as here.
Mr. Pullinger?
So I would say the policy is reasonable, actually. I think it can cause issues, and I think it being clear on what can and can't happen in terms of certain processes and things where there is a personal relationship is valuable to have. So I actually support the policy. I guess the only actual thing for me is whether something's missing from the policy, in that I'm not aware of any cases at the moment, but what about potential for personal relationships between employees and members, and should that be included within there somehow?
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Pullinger. So I think we, other than those comments, I think I'm not getting any other comments, so I think it should be taken as read, and just perhaps a further clarification around maybe a sentence around the councillor issue. I know that's covered. I think we do cover obviously member relationships, if I can put it that way, elsewhere, but just reading the two across, I think. So, okay. Sorry, Councillor Foster.
I was going to say, so is that going to come back again with the rest of them? Or are we saying this is?
Well, I'm happy to have members sort of input on that, because I know there was some obviously people were very strongly in favour of rewriting, and others that were just going to be tweaked. I mean, I think the ones that were going to be sort of tweaked, and this might be one of them, is just we can have them as an appendix or a supplement. Would that be?
My suggestion is we do the minor adaptation, but we bring it back so that you can then understand that.
Yeah,
I'm in favour of this one, by the way, just for the record.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Strawn?
If we're going to get minor amendments made to come back to us, perhaps they could be shown on a tracked basis, then we can see quite clearly what the change is, because if we just get a clean sheet of paper, trying to work it out without tracking is incredibly time consuming.
Yeah. Is that okay, Helen? And just the ones where we wanted the very small changes, because obviously if you've got a whole page of tracked comments, that's very confusing, but just the smaller changes, and then obviously the whole rewrites will be new papers entirely, won't they? So we'll know which are the ones, the new papers, and ones which have just been amended slightly. Okay, good. Okay, thanks for that, colleagues. I think that's now all of them, actually. It is. Thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, moving on to items for information. I don't think there are any. Public open session. Has anybody tuned in, Karim, at all, or nobody's come in? Okay, that's good. Okay, so we're now going to move to the exempt session. And just give everyone another a minute or two, and that's the end of the this session. Thank you.